Zenith's spire hung above Earth like a bad decision, unavoidable and bound to go wrong sooner or later. In the grand tradition of human architectures, it was overcomplicated, underfunded, and managed by people who couldn't organize a piss-up in a brewery. Yet, here it stood, Earth's grand defense against anything the universe might fling at us. A fact that made anyone with half a brain nervous. Commander Jax Thorne leaned against the worn metal railing at Command Deck 13, peering out into space as if it might suddenly erupt in a Broadway show. It was one of his better days, meaning he hadn't yet been screamed at by superiors or juniors. He took a long sip from his coffee, or what the vending machine dared to call coffee. It tasted like regret and motor oil, but he supposed it's what he deserved for the morning he was having. "You know," he grumbled to no one in particular but loud enough for everyone to hear, "if a fleet of aliens decided to drop by for tea today, I bet they'd be more offended by the catering than our defenses." Lyra Quill, the station's resident engineering genius, strolled in, her hair pulled back into a ponytail so tight it seemed to mock gravity. She had the sort of face that looked permanently unimpressed, as if the universe had let her down one too many times. "Jax, I swear, if you're trying to manifest an intergalactic incident with your coffee, at least aim for a taste revolution. Lyra, if this station had a spirit animal, it'd be a sloth drunk on fermented bananas. And yet here we are, supposedly the last bastion of humanity's galactic defense. What could possibly go wrong? The answer was obvious. Everything. Especially today. The sensors were twitchy, the comms were glitching more than usual, and the air recyclers had decided to add a hint of sewage to the station atmosphere. It was shaping up to be one of those hit the ground running and fall flat on your face kind of days. Lyra dropped into the seat opposite Jax, pulling up the holographic displays with a flick of her wrist, the screens dancing to life, casting a blue glow that made everyone look like the extras in a cheap sci-fi flick. "We've got a blip on the radar, Jax." "Define blip," Jax replied, because with Lyra, blip could mean anything from a piece of space debris the size of a toaster to an armada of pissed-off intergalactic tax collectors. "Not sure yet," she said, squinting at the data as if it had personally insulted her. "But it's big and it's moving fast." Jax sighed, rubbing his temples. "Of course it is. Probably just another convoy of idiots thinking they can park their junk in Earth's orbit." Lyra tapped a few more icons, zooming in on the readout. "If that's junk, it's the shiniest junk I've ever seen." As the station's alarms began to wail, a noise resembling a distressed donkey being run over by a steamroller, Jax knew their luck had just taken a nosedive. The kind that spirals extravagantly into the abyss. "All hands," Jax announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We've got visitors. The kind you don't send a fruit basket to." The crew, a ragtag bunch if ever there was one, began scrambling. If you can call it scrambling when half are still rubbing sleep out of their eyes and the other half are pretending this was all a dream they could eventually wake up from. Lyra was already diving into the diagnostics, her fingers dancing across the controls like a maestro conducting a particularly frenetic symphony. "I've got a visual," she said, throwing the image onto the main screen. The room collectively sucked in a breath. There it was, a fleet of ships, sleek and alien like something out of a B-movie director's fever dream, gliding towards Earth with a sort of ominous grace. "Well, shit," Jax muttered, because what else was there to say? "What do they want?" Lyra shrugged, nonchalant as ever. "Pity the manual didn't come with a chapter on interstellar diplomacy." "We're about to find out," Jax replied, thumbing the comms panel, his voice calm but edged with the type of dread reserved for tax audits and family reunions. "Unidentified fleet, this is Commander Jax Thorne of the Zenith Spire. State your intentions or prepare to be extremely disappointed." The reply, when it came, was a low, guttural rumble that seemed to reverberate through the very bones of the station. "Earth must comply." "Comply with what?" "Our warranty ran out years ago," Jax shot back, earning a snort from Lyra. "What's the deal here, guys?" Silence. The kind of silence that follows a bad joke where everyone's waiting for the punchline that never arrives. Lyra turned to Jax, her expression suggesting she'd rather be knee-deep in engine grease than this conversation. I'm guessing they're not here for the sightseeing. Looks like, Jax replied, scratching his chin. So, what's our plan? Lyra leaned back, hands behind her head. We could panic and run around screaming. Tempting, Jax agreed, glancing at the screens again as they displayed the approaching fleet. But let's try Plan B, figuring out why they think they can bark orders at us. The station shuddered slightly, the first of the alien ships taking position in orbit. It was like having the universe's worst neighbor move in next door, the kind who hosts 3 a.m. drum circles and lets their dog crap on your lawn. Let's keep hailing them, Jax suggested, more out of desperation than any real hope. Maybe they'll get bored and just bugger off. As the crew settled into a routine of monitoring and trying to make heads or tails of the alien signals, Lyra's voice cut through the cacophony. You ever think we might be over our heads here, Jax? Every damn day, Jax admitted, watching as the alien ships continued their silent vigil. But the alternative is retirement, and I'm really not ready for that level of boredom. Lyra laughed, a short, sharp sound. Remind me to never retire. I'd miss all this excitement. Jax nodded, looking out at the cosmos, dark and indifferent. In the meantime, let's just hope those ships out there are as indecisive as we are. As if on cue, the alien fleet began to rearrange, each ship moving with eerie precision, the kind that suggested they'd been practicing for just this sort of cosmic choreography. They're forming up, Lyra noted, her voice cracking with a mixture of fear and fascination. Jack sighed, the weight of the galaxy suddenly very real on his shoulders. Looks like they've remembered what they came for. The station's comms crackled again, the voice deeper, more insistent. Earth must comply or be extinguished. There it is, Jack said, turning to Lyra with a grim smile. The classic ultimatum. Comply or die. I vote we choose option C, Lyra said, her fingers flying across the controls as she began rerouting power and prepping defenses. C for chaos, Jax asked, one eyebrow raised. C for we're going to make them regret underestimating us. Jax grinned despite himself. I like it. As the aliens began their advance, the station's defenses whirred to life, the hum of energy and anticipation filling the air. It was a strange, surreal moment, this calm before the storm, as if the universe had paused just to see what these silly humans would do next. Jax took a deep breath, his mind racing through strategies and contingencies. Let's show them what happens when Earth decides not to play nice. The air was charged with tension, the crew steeling themselves for what was to come. As Lyra recalibrated the weapon systems, she shot Jax a final glance. Ready to become legends, Commander. Legends, losers, or lunatics, Jax replied with a shrug. Guess we'll find out soon enough. With the alien fleet poised to strike, the station bracing for impact, and Earth hanging in the balance, Jax Thorne knew one thing for sure. Retirement had never looked so good. The alien ships hung in the black void like a row of sinister Christmas decorations, each one glinting with the promise of impending doom. Jax Thorne, with his coffee that tasted like a midlife crisis in a cup, stood at the helm of humanity's questionable defense, Zenith Spire. He stared hard at the alien fleet, half expecting them to release a statement about Earth's subpar hospitality. The comms crackled again, and this time the voice was punctuated with a strange, oddly familiar tone. Earth. Comply with Galactic Protocol 1138. Jax almost choked on his coffee. Did they just quote a sci-fi movie? Please tell me they're not basing their invasion strategy on vintage cinema. Lyra, forever unimpressed and unfazed, glanced at him from the control panel. Maybe they picked up some old broadcasts. Could explain why they want us to comply like we're extras in a space opera. Brilliant, Jax muttered, eyeing the display with disdain. Our first contact with aliens and they think we're following a script. Not like we're winging it every day or anything. Lyra flicked through data files, her face a mask of concentration. They're sending more signals. Something about the Prime Directive and universal peacekeeping. Jack squinted at the screen. So they are either incredibly misguided Star Trek fans or they've got the wrong planet. Wonder when we'll have to pretend to be Vulcans. Ear prosthetics would suit you, Lyra quipped, smirking at her own reflection in the holographic interface. Jax had to chuckle despite himself. Yeah, and all I'd need is a sense of logic. Shame I traded that for sarcasm years ago. The crew, meanwhile, were in various states of bafflement, trying to decipher the aliens' demands. Some were arguing over whether Galactic Protocol 1138 was a real threat or just a cosmic prank. Others were preparing the station's limited defenses with the grim resolve of people who had long ago accepted their fate as cannon fodder. Okay, let's assume they're serious, Jack said, pulling the crew's attention back to the task at hand. What the hell do we do about it? Lyra shrugged, typing furiously into the console. We could try explaining the mix-up. Tell them movies aren't real and see how they take it. Seems a bit harsh to crush their dreams like that, Jax replied, not entirely sure who he was more worried about, the aliens or the crew. But hey, at least we'd be doing some interstellar community service. The comms buzzed again, this time with an even stranger mandate. Earth, implement Order 66. Cold and mechanical, it carried the gravity of a parole officer delivering bad news. Order 66. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Didn't that involve, executing all the Jedi? Jack snorted. Lucky for us, no Jedi here. Just a bunch of sleep-deprived, underpaid operators who'd love an early retirement. As the aliens continued broadcasting what sounded like a greatest hits playlist of sci-fi tropes, the crew on Command Deck 13 was busy indulging in a mix of gallows humor and genuine concern. The tension was palpable, but then again, so was the absurdity. Maybe they'll demand we build a Death Star next, Lyra joked as she rerouted more power to the shields. Can't be worse than our current plans for lunar condos, Jax replied. Swear the architects are just trying to kill us creatively. The alien ships, still forming an elaborate pattern in the sky, seemed to pause in their advance, almost as if waiting for Earth to do something predictable. Maybe they were hoping for a CGI-laden battle, but all Zenith Spire had to offer was the equivalent of a middle school play. Let's try another channel, Jack suggested, thumbing a control panel. Maybe we can find someone among them who's not a fanboy. Lyra switched frequencies, her fingers a blur, until a new voice crackled through. This one was higher pitched, with a hint of condescension that only a superior intellect, real or imagined, could muster. Earth, respond. Compliance with Intergalactic Code 42 is mandatory. Intergalactic Code 42. Jax repeated, glancing at Lyra with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, sure, the answer to life, the universe, and everything, Lyra replied dryly. Wonder if they've got a towel handy. Man, these guys really need to get out more, Jax said, scratching his head. Or at least update their reference library. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on the crew. Here they were, humanity's supposed defenders, trying to decode alien demands that sounded more like a teenager's favorite sci-fi trilogy than genuine warfare. All right, Jax announced, tapping his foot. Let's see if we can talk some sense into them, or at least confuse them enough to buy us time. Lyra grinned. You want me to handle it? I'm pretty good at confusing people. By all means, Jax replied, gesturing grandiosely. Show them what Earth is really made of, sharp wit and questionable strategic planning. Lyra leaned into the mic, her voice dripping with the kind of enthusiasm one reserves for explaining taxes to a toddler. Hello. This is Zenith Spire, Earth's defense station. We'd love to comply with your, requests, but could you clarify a few things? We're a bit behind on our space law classes. The response was immediate and the aliens' confusion was almost tangible. Earth, comply with galactic mandates. Your existence is at stake. Right about that, Lyra continued, We're a bit fuzzy on which mandates you mean. Got a copy of the syllabus or something? There was a pause, and it was the kind that made Jax think maybe, just maybe, they were getting through to these extraterrestrial bureaucrats. Earth, cease hostilities. Provide coordinates for compliance centers. Jax blinked. Compliance centers, Lyra shrugged. Maybe they think we're a franchise. Tell them the only franchise around here is a fast food chain, Jax suggested, unable to keep the amusement out of his voice. What's the worst that could happen? Lyra agreed, flipping the switch again. Attention, alien fleet. We'd love to accommodate your requests, but we're fresh out of compliance centers. Can we interest you in a complimentary tour of Earth's cultural hotspots instead? The station crew stifled laughs, some outright snickering at Lyra's audacity. It wasn't much, but humor was the only armor they had against the absurdity of their situation. The alien voice returned, this time slower, deliberate, as if talking to particularly dense children. Earth, failure to comply will result in reclassification. You must enact Protocol 9. Protocol 9. Jax echoed, bewildered. Which one's that? The one where we all dress up like robots and do a synchronized dance, Lyra sighed, casting a look at the alien ships that now seemed to be forming something resembling a threatening Kangha line. I think Protocol 9 is more of a last chance before annihilation kind of deal. Well, if they're expecting a Michael Jackson tribute, they are in for a shock, Jax said, shaking his head. What do we do now? Confusion's been working so far, Lyra replied. Let's keep it up. Maybe they'll get frustrated and leave. The crew, clearly buoyed by Lyra's strategy of bewilderment, redoubled their efforts to appear as non-threatening and clueless as possible. It was remarkable how effective chaos could be when wielded correctly. All right, folks, Jax declared, surveying his motley crew. Let's show them what Earth can do, poor communication skills and all. The station shuddered slightly as the aliens made another adjustment, their ships now forming a perfect semicircle around the planet. It was a power move, the cosmic equivalent of a neighborhood watch meeting gone horribly wrong. Looks like they're serious, Lyra said, her humor giving way to a hint of concern. If only they were as fond of interpretive dance as they are of directives, Jax mused. But hey, maybe they'll appreciate our creativity. As the aliens prepared for another round of demands, Jax and Lyra exchanged a knowing look. It was the kind of silent understanding shared by those who knew they were in over their heads, but were determined to face it with a grin and a shrug. Here they come again, Lyra said as the comms buzzed with new energy. The alien voice was back, this time with a veneer of impatience. Earth, you have one final opportunity to comply. Implement Earth Preservation Protocol 6. Failure will be met with immediate action. Oh, good, Jax said, rolling his eyes. More arbitrary numbers. How about we just make some up by ourselves? Works for me, Lyra replied, turning back to the mic. Attention, alien fleet. We're currently unable to process your requests due to a systems glitch. Please hold the line while we transfer you to our customer service department. The crew erupted into chuckles, the kind of laughter that only comes when facing your own imminent demise. It was absurd, but it was all they had, and for the moment it was enough. Let's see if they hold, Jax said, leaning back in his chair. Maybe they'll think twice about picking on the little guy next time. As the minutes ticked by, with the alien fleet seemingly stalled by a bureaucratic nightmare of their own making, Jax allowed himself a moment of hope. Maybe they'd bought themselves time. Maybe, just maybe, the aliens would reconsider and leave them in peace. Or maybe, he thought with a wry smile, they'd just go watch more movies and come back with even more nonsensical demands. Either way, Jax Thorne wasn't about to let the absurdity of the universe defeat him, not when there were still sarcastic remarks to be made and bad coffee to endure. In the grand theater of interstellar diplomacy, Earth had just delivered a masterclass in confusion. Jax Thorne leaned back against the railings of Command Deck 13, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth like a stubborn dog with a bone. You know, Lyra, if these alien bozos keep up with their space opera routine, we might just win a galactic golden raspberry. Lyra Quill didn't even glance up from her console, where she was unleashing a flurry of keystrokes that looked more like a death metal drummer's set list than any legitimate engineering work. If they hand out awards for the most creatively bankrupt fleet, we should definitely put ourselves in the running. Right, Jack said, surveying the motley assemblage of ships outside, forming what might charitably be described as a threatening conga line. What do you think their next move is? Dressing up like stormtroopers and demanding to see our leader, please. If they ask to see our leader, they'll be disappointed to find out it's a committee that can't decide if pizza is a vegetable, Lyra replied, her face as impassive as a rock in a Zen garden. What's our next move, Commander? Besides continue being the interstellar equivalent of a whoopee cushion. Jax rubbed his chin thoughtfully, trying to ignore the feeling that they were part of some cosmic sketch comedy. Well, since they seem to be taking their cues from B-movies, let's give them a show. Got a plan, or are we winging it like always? Lyra asked, punching a few more keys with the kind of vigor usually reserved for professional whack-a-mole players. Let's see how they handle a little good old-fashioned chaos, Jack said, rubbing his hands together like a villain in a soap opera. We'll lead them on a merry chase. Make them work for their ridiculous demands. Lyra looked up, her expression one part skepticism, one part amusement. So the plan is to make them think we're dumber than we are. Pretend we're a bunch of clowns juggling live grenades. Pretty much, Jax confirmed, crossing his arms. We'll send out random signals, jam their sensors, and reroute power to systems that don't need it. Confusion and chaos, the twin pillars of human ingenuity. Sounds like a Saturday night on Earth, Lyra said dryly, turning back to her console with newfound determination. All right, let's make these aliens regret ever tuning into our frequency. Jax watched as the alien formation outside began to shift, the ships moving in a carefully choreographed dance that seemed to scream, "We're serious, but not actually serious." It was like watching synchronized swimming in space, impressive in a baffling sort of way. Here we go, Jax said, standing up straighter, his eyes flicking from the screen to the real deal outside. Let's broadcast some classical music, something to set the tone. Lyra nodded, typing rapidly. Beethoven or Mozart? Neither. I'm thinking something more like yakety sax, Jax replied with a mischievous grin. Let's see if they can take a joke. Within moments, the absurdly upbeat tune blared through the comms, mixing with the static and the aliens' insistence on galactic compliance. The effect was immediate. The ships outside began to jitter, a few breaking formation as if caught in an invisible net of confusion. Looks like they weren't expecting our cultural superiority, Jax said with a mock bow. Who knew bad music could be a weapon? Lyra chuckled, her fingers never pausing. Nothing like a little Benny Hill to throw off an intergalactic armada. The alien voice crackled back to life, now tinged with what might have been panic or maybe just indigestion. Earth, desist your actions. You risk universal sanction. Jax rolled his eyes. Universal sanction, huh? Sounds like a fancy way to say you're about to get a cosmic spanking. Lyra adjusted her headset, her voice taking on a tone of mock sincerity. Attention, alien fleet. As per Earth regulations, we're currently undergoing a cultural renaissance. Please hold while we prepare our submission for the Galactic Talent Show. There was a pause, the kind that suggested the aliens were either consulting their own cosmic rulebook or just collectively facepalming. Okay, Jax said, his tone all business now. Let's start randomly rerouting power. Shake things up. Make it look like we're preparing for something big. On it, Lyra said, her hands a blur over the console. Let's see how they react to a little controlled anarchy. As the station began to flicker with erratic energy outputs, the alien fleet shifted again, this time more disorganized. It was as if someone had taken their playbook and started tearing out pages at random. Jax allowed himself a small sense of satisfaction. "Keep it up, Lyra. They can't fight what they can't understand. Story of our lives," Lyra muttered, an undercurrent of amusement in her voice. The alien voice returned, this time with the unmistakable tone of someone who was about 2 seconds from hitting the big red button. "Earth, state your intentions. Cease your nonsensical transmissions." Jax leaned forward, his voice dripping with mock innocence. "Oh, we're just enjoying a little downtime. You know, team-building exercises and all that. Care to join?" The response was immediate and for the first time genuinely frustrated. "Earth, you test the patience of the Galactic Council." Lyra snorted, shaking her head. "Galactic Council, huh? Bet that's a nightmare of a conference call." "Right," Jax agreed, grinning. "Imagine the hold music on that line." Outside, the alien ships finally seemed to regain some semblance of order, forming a tighter cluster that looked suspiciously like they were gearing up for something serious. "All right, what's next?" Lyra asked, her expression now all focus and determination. Jax cracked his knuckles, preparing for the next phase of their makeshift defense. "We scramble their comms. Make it sound like we're getting orders from the top, conflicting ones preferably." "Like a boss," Lyra replied, already prepping the necessary codes. "Confusion and chaos, remember." "Absolutely," Jax said, watching as the alien formation wavered once more. "Let's see how long we can keep them spinning." With a few deft movements, Lyra set the plan in motion, broadcasting random snippets of garbled, authoritative-sounding babble onto every frequency they could manage. The effect was almost immediate, like a pot of water about to boil over. "Looks like they're not handling the cognitive dissonance too well," Jax observed, delighted. "Guess they didn't prepare for the audacity of human nonsense," Lyra quipped, tapping a few more commands into the system. Jax chuckled, feeling a rare sense of camaraderie in the face of impending doom. "You know, Lyra, for all their bluster, they sure don't seem to handle unpredictability well." "Maybe we should take up consulting," she replied, eyes fixed on the screen. "Teach the universe a thing or two about organized chaos." The alien voice sputtered back into life, now sounding like it was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "Earth, what is the meaning of this? You defy logic." Jax grinned, savoring the moment. "Defying logic, now that's a compliment if I ever heard one." Lyra adjusted her headset, her voice smooth and confident. "Attention, alien armada. Please be advised that human logic is currently offline. We apologize for any inconvenience. Please hold, your call is important to us," Jax added with a wink. Outside, the alien ships seemed to be having a collective identity crisis, their movements becoming halting and uncertain. It was as if they were trying to navigate a minefield of their own making. Jax took a moment to appreciate the absurdity of it all. Here they were, a ragtag crew at the helm of a creaking station held together by duct tape and dreams, holding their own against an interstellar fleet that took itself far too seriously. "Lyra," he said, his voice laced with admiration, "you're one hell of an engineer." She shrugged, her expression a mix of pride and nonchalance. "Just doing my part to keep the chaos alive." Jax nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of optimism. Sure, the universe was vast and indifferent, but maybe, just maybe, there was room in it for a little human tenacity. The alien voice crackled back, now sounding weary and resigned. "Earth, your tactics are unconventional. We request a ceasefire to discuss terms." Jax exchanged a glance with Lyra, surprise and satisfaction mingling in his gaze. "Well, would you look at that? Looks like they're finally ready to talk." Lyra's lips curved into a small, triumphant smile. "Guess our brand of hospitality is catching on." "All right, let's see what they have to say," Jax said, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him like a well-worn coat. Lyra nodded, her fingers poised over the console. "Ready when you are, Commander." Jax took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "Okay, open a channel. Let's show these aliens what Earth is really made of." As the channel opened, Jax prepared to engage with the alien representative. He couldn't help but feel a surge of pride in his crew and their ability to adapt. Maybe they weren't the most sophisticated team in the galaxy, but they had something that couldn't be programmed or calculated: grit, humor, and a stubborn refusal to go quietly. The aliens might have their protocols and mandates, but Earth had Jax Thorne and Lyra Quill. And that, he thought with a grin, was worth all the universal sanctions in the world. The alien fleet outside Zenith Spire was beginning to resemble a disorganized school of fish, more than the supposedly fearsome armada it was meant to be. Jax Thorne watched the chaos unfold with a mix of amusement and mounting dread. It was like watching an overconfident kid trying to juggle chainsaws, a spectacle that was entertaining, right up until it went horribly wrong. "Looks like our little razzle-dazzle act might have bought us some time," Jax noted, leaning back in his chair, the grin on his face not quite reaching his eyes. Lyra Quill glanced up from her console, brow furrowed. "Yeah, but for how long? Eventually they're gonna realize we're just pressing random buttons and hoping for the best." Jax shrugged. "Hey, random is a strategy. Ask any toddler." Lyra rolled her eyes, but there was an edge of worry in her voice as she replied. "Hope the universe is in a forgiving mood. Our tech is hanging by a thread, and I'm pretty sure the vending machine just started speaking in tongues." Jax gave the offending machine a sidelong glance, its quiet whirring suddenly seeming ominous. "Great. Last thing we need is a possessed coffee maker on top of everything else." "Any chance of another signal jam?" Lyra shook her head. "Nope. We're fresh out of tricks for now. Need to let the systems cool down before we fry the whole deck." The comms crackled, interrupting their banter with a static-laced voice that could have belonged to an alien or a disgruntled customer service representative. "Earth, the Galactic Council demands." Yeah, demands compliance, cessation of hostilities, blah blah blah," Jax interrupted, waving his hand dismissively at the invisible alien behind the voice. "Tell them we're out to lunch." "Out to lunch?" Lyra arched an eyebrow. Hope they are in the mood for some existential dread with a side of desperation. The tension in the room was palpable despite their gallows humor. There was only so much chaos they could create before the aliens caught on, and when they did, it wasn't going to be pretty. "Any chance we can boost our defenses?" Jax asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it aloud. Lyra's fingers danced over the keys, her expression one of grim determination. "I could reroute power from life support. But unless you're a fan of hypoxia, I wouldn't recommend it." "Noted," Jax said, trying to keep the mood light. "Breathing is on my list of favorite pastimes." Outside, the alien ships were regrouping, forming tighter clusters that suggested they were done with the games. The synchronized choreography had returned, and it seemed like they were preparing a grand finale that wouldn't end with raucous applause. "Looks like they're gearing up for something," Lyra observed, tension lining her voice like a taut rope. "Probably not a fireworks show," Jax replied, a sardonic edge to his words. "Unless we're the fireworks." "Love their sense of drama," Lyra said dryly. "Very Shakespearean of them." Jax sighed, feeling the weight of command settle heavily on his shoulders. "All right, let's see what we can do." "Ideas, besides praying to whichever deity happens to be on duty today," Lyra quipped, though her eyes were focused and calculating. "We could try a power surge. Overload the sensors and hope it scrambles their targeting systems." "Risky," Jax mused. "But at this point, why not? Besides, living dangerously is all the rage." Lyra nodded, her fingers already moving over the console with practiced efficiency. "Let's light this candle then." The station's lights flickered, a momentary blackout that seemed to stretch into eternity before everything snapped back into place. Outside, the alien ships bobbed and weaved as though suddenly attacked by invisible wasps. "That did something," Jax said, watching the spectacle with barely concealed glee. "Or absolutely nothing, and they're just having a really bad day," Lyra added, though there was a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Another crackle of static and the alien voice returned, now tinged with exasperation. "Earth, You persist in your irrational behavior. This will not end well for you." Jax snorted. "Now there's a statement that could apply to my entire life." "You mean your entire career," Lyra corrected, with a smirk. "Touché," Jax conceded, though his mind was already racing through their dwindling list of options. As the alien ships began to regroup with alarming precision, the comms erupted into a cacophony of distorted voices, a jumble of languages, commands, and what might have been an alien version of bad karaoke. Lyra looked up, confusion etched on her face. "What the hell is that?" Jax leaned closer, trying to decipher the noise. "Sounds like a conference call from hell. Or maybe they're attempting to communicate like us." "Badly?" Lyra suggested. "Exactly," Jax agreed. "But whatever it is, it's buying us a few more precious moments to figure out our next move." The alien fleet seemed to be hesitating, their orderly formation fraying at the edges as if they were unsure of their next steps. "Think they're having an existential crisis?" Lyra asked, only half joking. "Maybe they're just as sick of bureaucracy as we are," Jax replied. "If that's the case, we might have more in common than we thought." "Brings a tear to the eye, doesn't it?" Lyra deadpanned. "Intergalactic empathy over mutual disdain for paperwork." Jax chuckled, though the laughter quickly faded as the weight of their situation settled back over him. The station was running on fumes, and they were one wrong move away from disaster. "We need to figure out how to keep this going," he said, his voice serious now. "They'll regroup eventually, and when they do, we need to be ready." Lyra nodded. "I'll see if I can get the sensors to give us a clearer picture of what we're dealing with. If their formations change again, we'll need to know." "Good idea," Jax replied. The station shuddered violently, cutting Jax off mid-sentence. Emergency lights flared, casting a sickly red glow over the command deck. "What the hell was that?" Lyra shouted, her eyes scanning the readouts for answers. Jax steadied himself against the console, adrenaline spiking through his veins. "Looks like they've decided to stop playing nice." The alien ships had begun targeting specific sections of the station with pinpoint accuracy, their synchronized attack patterns more akin to a well-rehearsed ballet than random strikes. "Looks like they've got their act together," Jax muttered, teeth gritted. "We need countermeasures, and fast." "On it," Lyra responded, her fingers a blur as she worked to bolster their defenses. "Rerouting power from auxiliary systems. It's not much, but it might buy us time." Jax nodded, feeling the familiar mix of fear and determination settle over him. "Time's all we need. Just a little more time." The station groaned under the stress, the metal around them singing in a discordant chorus that echoed through the command deck. Outside, the universe continued its indifferent spin, and Jax couldn't help but feel like they were ants trying to stop a glacier. Another shudder, another barrage narrowly avoided. The walls felt like they were closing in, the pressure of the moment threatening to crush them. "We're reaching critical thresholds," Lyra warned, her voice tight with strain. "Any more of this and it's lights out." Jax looked around at the command deck, the team of exhausted personnel doing their best to keep the station running against impossible odds. Each face bore the same expression, weary defiance. "All right," Jax said, steeling his resolve. "Then let's give them something to think about." Lyra's eyes met his, understanding passing between them in an instant. "Ready when you are." Jax took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "Let's see if we can overload their systems one more time. Maybe we can get them to back off. Just need a bit more chaos." As Lyra initiated the sequence, the station's lights dimmed, flickering like a candle in a storm. Outside, the alien ships reacted, scattering like startled birds caught off guard. "Looks like it's working," Jax said, his voice a mix of relief and disbelief. "For now," Lyra cautioned. "But we're flying blind. If they adapt, we're screwed." Jax nodded, the truth of her words settling over him like a shroud. "Then we better hope they are as stubborn as they are stupid." For a moment, everything was still, the universe holding its breath as the two sides squared off, each equally determined not to blink first. As the command deck hummed with tension, Jax allowed himself a small, grim smile. They might be facing impossible odds, but they were still standing, still fighting. And as long as there was breath in their lungs, they'd keep doing just that. "All right, Lyra," Jax said, his voice steady. "Let's keep this going. We've got a universe to confuse." Lyra nodded, determination etched into her features. "Let's make them work for it." As the two of them braced for the next assault, Jax couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie with his crew. They were up against the odds, but if there was one thing humans were good at, it was defying expectations. And with any luck, they'd keep doing just that. The station's lights flickered like a bar run by an electrician with a drinking problem, casting ominous shadows over Command Deck 13. Jax Thorne leaned against the railing, straining to keep his composure in the face of impending doom. Outside, the alien fleet loomed like a swarm of metal locusts, relentlessly picking apart what little remained of the station's defenses. Lyra Quill sat hunched over her console, her fingers dancing like a tap dancer on speed. Despite everything, her demeanor was infuriatingly calm, like she was solving a crossword instead of staving off the apocalypse. Jax admired her for it, even if he wished he could throttle her for being so damn composed. "Any bright ideas, Lyra?" Jax asked, injecting as much cheer as he could muster into his voice. It wasn't much, maybe a teaspoon of optimism in an ocean of despair. "Well, we could try inviting them over for tea and scones, see if they fancy a nice chat about universal peace," Lyra replied without missing a beat, her voice as dry as a desert in a drought. Jax chuckled despite himself. "Sounds about as plausible as our current plan." "Which plan?" "The one where we hope they get bored and leave, or the one where we pray our station's wiring holds up longer than our patience?" "Both," Jax admitted. The truth was, they were out of options. The aliens had torn through their defenses like a starved bulldog through a steak. Morale was plummeting faster than an asteroid with a death wish. The emergency lights bathed the room in an eerie red glow, setting the mood for the funeral that seemed inevitable. Jax glanced at Lyra, who was frowning at her screen as if willing it to give her an answer it didn't have. "I don't think they are here to negotiate," Lyra said, half to herself. "Negotiation might be less painful," Jax quipped, though in reality he felt like a bug under a magnifying glass, just waiting to pop. The alien ships had begun a new formation, an intricate dance of machinery that suggested they were preparing for a final push. It had all the elegance of synchronized swimming, but with the potential for a much bloodier outcome. "Think they're gonna make their move?" Jax asked, not sure if he wanted to hear the answer. "Hope they send us a thank you note for making it so easy," Lyra replied, her sarcasm a thin veil over genuine concern. The station shuddered again, a violent tremor that rattled teeth and frayed nerves. It was the kind of shake that made you question if anything in life was built to last, or if everything was just temporarily duct-taped together by people who were too tired to care. "What's the status on our defenses?" Jax asked, trying to sound more optimistic than he felt. "About as robust as wet tissue paper," Lyra said, her eyes scanning the readouts. "We're down to minimal shielding, and our weapons systems are about as useful as a screen door on a spaceship." Jax grunted. "Well, at least we're consistent." They fell into a tense silence, the kind that presses down on you like a lead blanket. Outside, the alien fleet was winding up for what looked like their grand finale. Jax wished he could appreciate their dedication to the craft, but he was too busy contemplating the many ways he could die today. "Maybe we should have taken that job on the Pleasure Moon," Jax said, more to himself than Lyra. "Yeah," Lyra replied without looking up. "But then who'd be here to make sure the vending machine didn't take over?" Jax chuckled. "Still amazed that thing hasn't unionized yet." The lights dimmed further, a sure sign that the station was on its last legs. It felt like watching a once-proud warrior staggering around the ring after taking one too many hits to the head. "We're running out of time, Jax," Lyra said, no longer bothering to hide the fear in her voice. "We can't keep this up." Jax nodded, words failing him for once. He wasn't sure what to say that wouldn't sound like a hollow platitude or a desperate plea. He was their commander, for better or worse, and he needed to act like it, even if he felt like a fraud wearing a uniform 2 sizes too large. "All right," Jax said finally, his voice firmer than he felt. "Let's see if we can't give these bastards a parting gift." "And what would that be?" Lyra asked, a hint of curiosity mingling with her skepticism. "Chaos," Jax replied with a grim smile. "Our specialty." Lyra nodded, a flicker of determination reigniting in her eyes. "Chaos it is, then. Let's make it a show they won't forget." Together, they set to work, orchestrating their last-ditch effort to sow confusion among the enemy ranks. It wasn't much, but it was all they had left. If they were going down, they'd do it with style. "Engage the randomizer," Jax ordered, the words tasting like ashes in his mouth. It was a plan born of desperation, but sometimes desperation was the mother of invention, or at least the mother of really stupid ideas. Lyra hit the controls, and the station's systems flickered unpredictably, lights flashing like an unruly disco. Outside, the alien ships jerked in surprise, their formation unraveling as they struggled to adjust to the sudden chaos. "Looks like it's working," Lyra said, a note of triumph in her voice. "Or they're just really bad at handling surprises," Jax replied, though he allowed himself a brief moment of hope. The alien fleet hesitated, their movements disjointed, as if they were trying to dance to a tune that changed every few seconds. It was a small victory, but in their situation, small victories were the only kind they could afford. Jax watched the unfolding chaos with a mixture of pride and dread. He was proud of their resilience, of their refusal to roll over and die quietly. But the reality was that their time was running out. The aliens wouldn't remain confused forever, and when they regrouped, it would be over. "Any last words, Commander?" Lyra asked, her fingers still working the controls with a frenetic energy that belied her calm exterior. "Yeah," Jax said, trying to sound brave. "Tell them we're out to lunch." Lyra grinned, a small but genuine smile that did wonders for Jax's morale. "I'll make sure they get the memo." The station shuddered again, the very air around them vibrating with the force of the alien assault. Jax braced himself against the console, fighting to keep his balance as the universe seemed intent on shaking them loose. For a moment, everything was chaos, a disorienting swirl of noise and movement that blurred the lines between reality and nightmare. It was like being caught inside a storm with no end in sight. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the shaking stopped. An eerie calm settled over the command deck, the kind of silence that makes you wonder if the world itself is holding its breath. "Did we?" Lyra began, her voice trailing off as if she couldn't quite bring herself to finish the question. Jax shook his head, unwilling to entertain the possibility. "No," he said firmly. "They're just regrouping." "Guess this is it then," Lyra said, her gaze locked on the alien fleet that hovered menacingly outside the station. Jax nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a mountain, but he refused to buckle under it. They'd made their stand, and now they'd face the consequences. "If this is our last hurrah," Jax said, his voice steady, "then let's make it one to remember." Lyra nodded, her resolve mirroring his own. "Agreed. Let's show them what humans are made of." Together, they turned their attention back to the battle, determined to fight until the very end. The odds were stacked against them, but they refused to go quietly into the void. Moments later, the alien fleet began their final assault, a coordinated barrage that lit up the darkness like a deadly fireworks display. The station groaned under the onslaught, its metal frame straining against the pressure. But Jax and Lyra held their ground, their defiance a beacon in the overwhelming darkness. They might be outgunned and outmatched, but they refused to surrender. If they were going down, they'd do it on their own terms. As the command deck shook under the relentless barrage, Jax couldn't help but smile. It was a small thing, a brief flicker of humor in the face of oblivion, but it was enough. Looks like they're really bringing the house down, he quipped, glancing at Lyra. She chuckled, a sound that was equal parts amusement and resignation. At least we've got front row seats. The station shuddered violently, the lights flickering one last time before plunging them into darkness. Jax felt the floor give way beneath him, a brief sensation of weightlessness before everything went black. In those final moments, as the universe closed in around them, Jax found solace in the knowledge that they'd stood their ground, that they'd fought with everything they had. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And then all was silent. When Jax awoke, it was to the sound of alarms blaring and the acrid smell of smoke. He blinked, trying to make sense of the chaos around him. The command deck was a mess, debris scattered like confetti in a war zone. "Lyra," he croaked, his voice hoarse and raw. "Yeah," came the reply, muffled but reassuring. "Still here." Jax breathed a sigh of relief, his heart lifting at the sound of her voice. Despite everything, they'd survived. They were battered, bruised, but alive. As the emergency systems kicked in, bathing the room in a dim, flickering light, Jax took stock of their situation. The station was in shambles, but they were still here, still fighting. "Looks like we made it," he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and relief. "For now," Lyra replied, her tone pragmatic but with a hint of hope. "But we've got a long way to go." Jax nodded, determination settling over him like a familiar cloak. They were far from out of the woods, but they'd made it this far, and with any luck they'd make it the rest of the way. "All right, Lyra," he said, a new resolve in his voice. "Let's get to work. We've got a station to save." Lyra grinned, her expression one of fierce determination. "Let's do it." Together they set to work, determined to rebuild, to fight another day. It wasn't going to be easy, but then again, nothing worth doing ever was. As they worked, Jax couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of hope. They'd face the darkness and come out on the other side, battered but unbroken. And as long as they had each other, they'd keep fighting. After all, they were human. Defying the odds was what they did best. Jax Thorne surveyed the wreckage of Command Deck 13, with the kind of fondness one usually reserved for a beloved but perpetually malfunctioning toaster. The place looked like it went 10 rounds with a disgruntled space god and came out on the losing end. Debris littered the floor, consoles sparked like they were holding a disco revival, and the air smelled faintly of fried circuits and crushed dreams. "Well, ain't that a sight?" Jax remarked, turning to Lyra Quill. "Feels like home." "Home," Lyra snorted, her fingers dancing over a barely functional console. If home was a dumpster fire. Jax couldn't argue with that, especially since the command deck's temperature was rising like a cheap holo romance. Somewhere in the chaos, the air conditioner had given up. Maybe it had unionized with the vending machine and demanded better working conditions. "What's our status?" Jax asked, leaning over Lyra's shoulder, trying to make sense of the jumble of red and orange alerts flashing across the screen. Lyra tapped the console with a mixture of disdain and affection. "About as stable as a politician's promise. We're down to auxiliary power, and the alien ships are still figuring out whether they want us fried, scrambled, or over easy." "Breakfast metaphors, Quill," Jax chuckled. "You hungry?" "Just trying to lighten the mood, Commander," she replied without missing a beat. "Besides, I skipped lunch." Jax nodded, focusing on the task at hand. They were up a creek without a paddle, on a sinking ship in the middle of a storm. And yet, Lyra was still at her console, eyes sharp and resolve unyielding. It was enough to inspire a hint of hope, buried under layers of sarcasm and grim reality. He was about to make another quip when Lyra's fingers froze mid-type, her eyes widening as if she just stumbled upon the holy grail of survival strategies, or at least something marginally less hopeless. "Jax, you might want to see this," she said, her voice tinged with something that could almost be called excitement if it wasn't so rare. Jax leaned closer, peering at the screen. It was a mess of alien script and human translations, courtesy of the galaxy's worst translating software. But amidst the gibberish, a pattern emerged. "Is that?" Jax hesitated, squinting at the text. "It's about Earth's fiction." "Yeah," Lyra nodded, her fingers flying across the console as she pulled up more data. The aliens have been analyzing Earth's historical records, but I think they've confused fiction with fact. Jax grinned, the kind of grin that usually preceded bad decisions and wild ideas. So they think we actually have superheroes and wizards with bad tempers. Pretty much, Lyra confirmed, looking up at him with a spark in her eyes. And if we play our cards right, we might be able to use that against them. Jax's mind raced with possibilities. It was a long shot, but at this point, long shots were their specialty. We could use this, he said, the wheels turning. Make them believe we've got powers they can't handle. Lyra nodded, already ahead of him. We just need to create enough of a spectacle to sell it. Smoke and mirrors, Jax replied, his mind snapping into gear. We've got smoke in spades, now we just need the mirrors. Yeah, but our tech is barely holding together, Lyra pointed out, a hint of skepticism in her voice. We might be running on hope and duct tape. Hope, duct tape, and human ingenuity, Jax corrected, a plan forming in the chaos of his thoughts. Let's rally the crew. If we're going down, let's make it an explosion to remember. They moved quickly, a sense of urgency propelling them through the wreckage as they gathered what remained of their crew. It wasn't much, a ragtag assembly of faces etched with exhaustion and determination, but it was enough. All right, listen up, Jax called out, standing in what used to be the center of the command deck, now an improvised rally point amidst the chaos. We've got a chance to turn this around, and I need all hands on deck. The crew gathered, their expressions a mix of skepticism and grim resolve. Jax could see it in their eyes, the same question reflected back at him. Are we really doing this? We've got intel, Lyra explained, stepping up beside Jax. The aliens have a fundamental misunderstanding of what Earth is capable of. They think our fiction is reality. There were murmurs of disbelief, but also curiosity, the kind that hinted at a crack in the wall of despair that had been steadily building since the attack began. Jax pressed on, determined to sell his vision. We're going to exploit that. Make them think we've got power they can't handle. If they believe even for a second that we can do the impossible, it might just buy us enough time to regroup. A ripple of energy passed through the crew, hope mingling with the skepticism. They'd been through hell, seen their odds plummet to sub-zero, and yet here they were, ready to fight with whatever scraps of hope and lunacy they could muster. How do you plan on doing that, Commander? One of the tech officers asked, arms crossed but eyes intrigued. We'll stage a show they'll never forget, Jax said, struggling to keep the manic edge out of his voice. We'll use every trick we've got, holograms, sound, light, you name it. Make them think twice before they come any closer. Won't they just see through it? Another voice piped up, doubt lined with a pragmatic edge. That's the beauty of it, Lyra chimed in, her grin wicked. We're humans. Improvisation is in our DNA. We're going to hit them with chaos on a scale they've never seen before. The room buzzed with a mixture of anticipation and incredulity. It was a gamble, a wild shot in the dark, but sometimes those were the only shots that mattered. All right, Jax said, clapping his hands together. Let's get to work. Lyra, coordinate the setups. I want lights, sounds, and holograms operational ASAP. Rig up whatever we can to make this look like the real deal. The crew dispersed, each member diving into their tasks with a renewed sense of purpose. There was something invigorating about the madness of the plan, a spark that cut through the bleakness and ignited a fire that refused to be snuffed out. As they worked, Jax moved from one station to the next, offering encouragement, sarcasm, and the occasional grim joke to keep spirits high. Remember, he told one young engineer who looked like he hadn't slept in days, if anyone can pull a rabbit out of a hat, it's us. Just don't expect it to be a live rabbit. Or a hat. Time ticked by with an urgency that felt like the universe was breathing down their necks, but slowly, amidst the chaos, the pieces began to come together. A makeshift control station here, a precarious stack of holographic projectors there. It was a patchwork miracle, the kind that could only be born from desperation and sheer stubbornness. Finally, as the last connections were made and the systems hummed to life, Lyra turned to Jax, her expression a mixture of pride and tension. "We're ready, Commander." Jax nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. This was it, their last stand, their final gamble. If they failed, there would be no coming back. But if they succeeded, they might just live to see another day. "All right, people," he called out, drawing the crew's attention. "This is our moment. Let's give them a show they'll never forget." With that, he gave the signal, and the station burst into life, a chaotic symphony of lights, sounds, and holograms that filled the void with a dazzling display of human ingenuity. The aliens, caught off guard by the unexpected spectacle, hesitated, their formation wavering as they tried to make sense of the sensory overload. Jax watched with a mixture of anxiety and fascination, his heart pounding in time with the beats of light and sound. It was a desperate gambit, a last-ditch effort to buy time, but amidst the chaos, there was a flicker of hope. "Do you think it's working?" Lyra asked, her eyes never leaving the monitor. "Hard to say," Jax replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "But they haven't blown us out of the sky yet, so I'll take that as a win." The seconds stretched into minutes, each one a heartbeat of tension that threatened to snap at any moment. But the aliens continued to waver, their hesitation growing as the spectacle unfolded before them. "Coming in hot," Lyra shouted suddenly, her voice cutting through the din as a warning signal flashed across the screen. "They're moving in, trying to flank us." Jax's mind raced, calculations and strategies tumbling over one another in a frantic attempt to keep up. "All right, engage sequence Delta," he ordered, his voice firm. "Let's see if we can't throw them off balance." The crew sprang into action, their movements a blur of coordinated chaos as they adjusted the display, ramping up the intensity and complexity of the spectacle. It was a dance of lights and sound, a furious explosion of creativity that defied the darkness closing in around them. And then, just when it seemed like the tension would never break, the aliens faltered. Their formation broke, ships scattering as confusion and uncertainty took hold. "We did it," Lyra breathed, disbelief mingling with relief. Jax nodded, a fierce grin splitting his face. "We bought ourselves some time. Now let's make the most of it." With renewed determination, they dove back into the fray, ready to fight with whatever time they had gained, fueled by the fire of defiance and the stubborn will to survive. Because in the end, they were human. And if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving the impossible. The hum of chaos was as constant as the station's malfunctioning air recycler, filling Command Deck 13 with the comforting aroma of panic and sewage. The crew moved like a swarm of angry, caffeinated ants, each one clutching at their tasks with the fervor of the damned. Jax Thorne, commander of this merry band of misfits, surveyed the scene with a mixture of pride and impending doom. "Hope, duct tape, and human ingenuity," he'd said. And now they were all about to find out just how far that could take them. "Engage sequence Delta," Jax ordered, his voice cutting through the commotion like a well-aimed bottle of cheap whiskey in a bar brawl. Lyra Quill, with the steady hands of someone who's used to diffusing both literal and metaphorical bombs, punched in the commands with a flourish. "Let's confuse the hell out of them," she muttered, her eyes glued to the flickering screen. The station erupted into a phantasmagoria of light and sound, a carnival of confusion that could only have been concocted by desperate humans on the brink. The holograms danced, a kaleidoscope of Earth's most terrifying creations: dragons, superheroes, angry witches, and a particularly menacing tax auditor. The alien fleet, floating ominously outside Zenith Spire, hesitated. Their sleek, creativity-bankrupt ships, likely designed during a Universal Accountants Convention, wobbled in the void. Lyra glanced at the sensors, which were about as trustworthy as a politician's promise. "I think they're confused," she said, a grin tugging at her lips. "Good," Jax replied, his eyes fixed on the chaos outside. "Let's make them wish they'd stayed at home watching intergalactic soap operas." The crew cheered, a ragged chorus of defiance echoing through the command deck. It was a strange thing, hearing hope amidst the groaning machinery and sparking consoles. But there it was, a flicker, fighting against the shadows of despair. "Incoming transmission," Lyra announced, her fingers dancing over the console. The screen sputtered before resolving into the image of an alien commander, his expression caught somewhere between curiosity and a bad case of indigestion. "Humans?" the alien sneered, his voice reverberating with the smugness of someone who'd never faced a decent challenge. "Your attempts at deception are quaint." Jax leaned into the transmission, flashing a grin that held all the charm of a wolf in a suit. "Quaint, huh? We prefer to call it strategically unhinged." The alien's gaze narrowed, his confidence wavering. "You can't expect us to believe you wield such powers." Jax shrugged, the picture of casual defiance. "Believe what you want, but I'd say our dragons are the least of your worries. You haven't even met our accountants." There was a flicker of doubt, a crack in the alien's facade that hinted at uncertainty. It was a small victory, but then again, in a universe that thrived on chaos, small victories were sometimes all you got. The transmission cut off, leaving silence heavier than a lead salad hanging over the command deck. The crew looked at Jax, a silent question in their eyes. "Right," Jax said, clapping his hands together as if he could shake off the tension like water from a bad suit. "Let's keep the curtain up. We've only got one act, and by damn, we're going to make it count." The crew dispersed, each member returning to their tasks with the kind of grim determination that only comes from knowing that failure is the default setting. There were no guarantees, no promises of salvation, just the raw, unfiltered drive to keep going when everything else was falling apart. Jax turned his attention back to Lyra, who was frowning at the console like it owed her money. "How's it looking?" "Like a spaghetti monster threw up on a motherboard," she replied, her voice a mix of sarcasm and exasperation. "But the aliens are still hesitating. They're not sure what to make of us." "Good," Jax said, watching the holograms flicker and dance. "Confusion is our ally. Let's keep them guessing." The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity in the standoff that hung heavy in the air. The alien fleet remained in disarray, their indecision a testament to the strength of human improvisation, or perhaps just the sheer absurdity of their plan. "Commander," one of the tech officers called out, waving him over. "I think they're trying to regroup." Jax chewed his lip, weighing options that seemed as flimsy as the station's air conditioning. "Can we hit them with another wave?" Lyra shrugged, her fingers a blur as she adjusted the settings. "We can try. But this tech is held together with prayers and chewing gum. It might blow up in our faces." "Wouldn't be the first time," Jax said, a wry smile playing on his lips. "Let's roll the dice." The command deck buzzed with activity as the crew scrambled to execute the next phase of their plan. Lights flickered, holograms shimmered, and the universe held its breath, waiting to see if the gamble would pay off. "Here goes nothing," Lyra murmured, her voice tinged with the kind of excitement that borders on lunacy. The station exploded into activity once more, a surge of light and sound that filled the void with the kind of spectacle that could only be described as apocalyptic cheerleading. The alien ships faltered, their formations crumbling under the weight of their own confusion. "They're breaking," Lyra shouted, her eyes wide with disbelief. "It's working." Jax's heart thundered in his chest, a wild rhythm that matched the chaos outside. "We might just pull this off." The alien fleet, so confident in their superiority, now found themselves scattered, their attempted flank falling apart like a bad soufflé. The aliens, it seemed, hadn't accounted for the one weapon humans wielded like no other: audacity. With a decisive motion, Jax slammed a fist onto the console, a gesture of both triumph and challenge. "Let's show them what happens when you underestimate Earth." The crew rallied, their spirits buoyed by the unexpected turn of events. They were a ragtag bunch, held together by little more than stubbornness and half-forgotten dreams, but in that moment they were invincible. "Commander," Lyra said, her voice cutting through the din, "we need to press the advantage. If we don't, they'll regroup." Jax nodded, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and half-baked strategies. "All right, Let's hit them with everything we've got. Keep them on their toes." As the crew redoubled their efforts, the station echoed with the sounds of renewed hope, clattering keyboards, sparking wires, and the occasional curse as someone narrowly avoided decapitation by rogue machinery. The alien fleet, caught off guard by the ferocity of human ingenuity, faltered. Their ships, once a testament to universal conformity, now drifted in disarray, unable to withstand the assault of coordinated chaos. "Commander," a voice called out, tinged with equal parts awe and disbelief. "They're retreating." Jax blinked, the words sinking in with the weight of a long-awaited miracle. "Retreating," Lyra nodded, her expression a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "We did it. They're pulling back." The command deck erupted into cheers, the sound of victory reverberating through the station like a battle cry. It was a triumphant moment, a rare taste of success in a universe that seemed hell-bent on tearing them apart. Jax took a moment to savor the victory, to let the euphoria wash over him like a balm against the relentless tide of despair. They'd done the impossible, turned the tide against overwhelming odds, and for a brief, shining moment, they stood victorious. But the universe, as always, had a way of reminding them that triumph was a fleeting thing. "Don't get too comfortable," Jax said, his voice carrying the weight of caution. "This isn't over. We've bought ourselves time, but we need to use it wisely." The mood shifted, the reality of their situation reasserting itself with the force of a cold shower. They might have won this skirmish, but the war was far from over. "What's our next move?" Lyra asked, her eyes steady and resolute. Jax considered the question, the myriad possibilities unfurling in his mind like a tangled web. "We regroup, repair what we can, and prepare for whatever comes next. They're not going to stay away for long." The crew nodded, their expressions a mix of determination and fatigue. They were battered and bruised, held together by little more than sheer willpower, but they were still standing. And in the grand scheme of things, that was a victory in itself. "We'll need to update Earth," Lyra said, her fingers already flying across the console. "Let them know what's happened." Jax nodded, aware of the importance of keeping command in the loop. "Do it. They need to know we're still in the fight." As Lyra worked on the transmission, Jax took a moment to marvel at the resilience of his crew. They'd faced impossible odds, stared down the abyss, and emerged on the other side, not unscathed but alive. "All right, people," he called out, drawing the crew's attention once more. "We've got a reprieve, but it's not a vacation. Let's get to work." The crew dispersed, their movements weary but determined. There was still much to do, repairs to be made, strategies to be devised. But for now, they'd earned a moment of respite. Jax lingered for a moment, taking in the scene before him. It was a mess of sparking wires, flickering lights, and exhausted faces. But it was also a testament to human endurance, to the indomitable spirit that refused to be crushed. "Think they'll be back?" Lyra asked, joining him at the railing. "Most likely," Jax replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "But we'll be ready." And in that moment, amidst the chaos and uncertainty, there was a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that no matter what came next, they'd face it together. Because in the end, humanity had always been its own worst enemy and greatest ally, and if there was one thing they were good at, it was surviving the impossible. The uneasy calm that followed the alien retreat was the kind of silence you only ever got after a wild party or a narrowly avoided apocalypse. Jax Thorne stood at the edge of Command Deck 13, surveying the aftermath like a king, overlooking his freshly pillaged kingdom. The emergency lights still bathed everything in a hellish red, which seemed fitting since the place looked like Satan's rec room after a particularly rowdy game night. Lyra Quill was still at her post, her fingers dancing over the console with an agility that suggested she might have once been a concert pianist in a less chaotic life. "Well, that was unexpected," she said, offering Jax a look that was both impressed and slightly accusatory, as if he just pulled a rabbit or maybe a small dragon out of his hat and hadn't bothered to warn her first. Jax shrugged, leaning against the console and trying to look more relaxed than he felt. I like to keep people on their toes. Saves on buying proper shoes anyway. She snorted, a sound that somehow managed to convey affection and irritation in equal measure. Did you really think it would work? Let's just say I had more faith in our ability to confuse the hell out of them than in any of our actual weapons. He glanced at the still flickering holograms. Plus, I figured if we were going down, we might as well do it with style. Lyra shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Style, huh? Is that what they're calling it now? Sure, Jack said, grinning. Though some might call it reckless stupidity. The crew was still buzzing around them, patching up the latest casualties of their malfunctioning tech. There was an air of exhaustion mingled with relief, like survivors of a shipwreck who'd washed up on shore, only to find out the island was inhabited by angry penguins. How's the station? Jax asked, nodding towards the sparking consoles and the acrid smoke creeping through the ventilation like a particularly vengeful ghost. Breathing for now, Lyra replied, her fingers flicking switches with a deftness that suggested she could dismantle a bomb in her sleep. But if we don't get the air recycler fixed soon, we'll suffocate in our own stink. At least that'll save us from dealing with the committee, Jack said. You know how they love to deliberate over trivial matters like whether pizza is a sandwich. Ah, yes. The great debate of our time, Lyra said, rolling her eyes. Meanwhile, we're here trying not to be vaporized by cosmic peacemakers. As long as they keep debating, we keep breathing, Jax replied, giving a nod to a crew member who looked like he'd just escaped a brawl with a particularly surly toaster. But seriously, we need to get this place back in fighting shape. Next time they might bring their A-game. Lyra gave a small, bitter laugh. Let's hope the committee doesn't decide our defense budget needs repurposing for more important things, like funding an interstellar art exhibit. Well, they say art brings people together, Jax mused. Maybe they'll paint us a nice "Do Not Invade" sign. The two of them watched the activity on the deck for a few moments, the hum of machinery and the occasional curse word filling the air. It was chaotic, messy, and about as far from perfect as you could get. But it was also proof that they were still here, still fighting, still doing their stubborn best to hold the line. You ever think about quitting? Lyra asked suddenly, her tone casual but her eyes revealing a hint of something deeper. Every damn day, Jax admitted. But where's the fun in that? She smiled, a genuine one this time, though it was tinged with the kind of weariness that went bone deep. Guess we're all a bunch of masochists at heart. They lapsed into a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The battle might be over, but the war was far from won. And yet, as they'd proven, sometimes the only way to win was to be more unpredictable than your enemy could handle. It was a strategy rooted not in strength or numbers, but in the pure, chaotic spirit of human ingenuity, a spirit that refused to be crushed, no matter the odds. Eventually, Lyra stretched, cracking her neck with a series of pops that probably violated some kind of health and safety regulation. I suppose we should see about getting these systems back online before someone decides we're overdue for a scolding. Jax nodded, pushing himself upright with the air of a man who had just remembered he was supposed to be in charge. Right. Back to the grind. They moved through the deck, coordinating repairs, offering encouragement, and occasionally making sarcastic suggestions that mostly served to lighten the mood. Despite the chaos and the ever-present threat of imminent doom, there was a sense of camaraderie that couldn't be shaken, a bond forged in the fires of absurdity. Think we'll get a medal for this? Lyra asked at one point, her face lit by the ghostly glow of a console that had given up on functioning properly. Jack snorted. If we do, it'll probably be made of recycled soda cans and come with a voucher for a free meal at the station's cafeteria. Ah, culinary excellence, Lyra said, grimacing at the memory of the cafeteria's infamous mystery meat. I'll pass. Suit yourself. More for me, Jack said, his grin irrepressible. Call me an optimist, but I'll take my victories where I can get them. With the immediate crisis averted, the crew settled into a routine of sorts. if you could call a series of frantic repairs, desperate improvisations, and semi-regular arguments over the merits of various emergency protocols a routine. But amidst the chaos, there was a sense of purpose, a shared understanding that they were all fighting for something bigger than themselves. And here I thought I'd signed up for the monotony of space duty, Lyra said one evening as they took a break near the observation deck, watching the stars spin lazily past. Monotony? Out here? Jax feigned shock. Clearly, you underestimated the excitement levels of a half-broken defense station on the edge of nowhere. Clearly, Lyra agreed, a smile tugging at her lips. But at least it keeps things interesting. Jax nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant stars. Funny thing about space, it's so damn vast, but it has a way of making you feel small. Small, and yet here we are making a difference, Lyra said quietly. Yeah, Jax agreed, a hint of pride in his voice. Guess there's something to be said for humanity's talent for punching above its weight class. Lyra chuckled, a soft, almost musical sound. Who knew chaos could be so effective? Not the aliens, that's for sure, Jax said, grinning. Maybe next time they'll bring an interpreter for strategic madness. They sat in silence for a while, content to simply exist in the moment, a moment that might have been fleeting but was no less real for it. The universe was a harsh, unforgiving place, but it was also a place of possibility, of hope, of endless potential for those foolish or brave enough to seize it. As they headed back to the command deck, Lyra glanced at Jax, her expression contemplative. Do you think we'll ever really understand it all? The universe, I mean. Jax laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the corridors. Hell, Lyra, I can't even understand half the things that happen on this station. But who says we need to understand? Maybe it's enough to just keep pushing forward, one reckless decision at a time. Here's to reckless decisions, then, Lyra said, raising an imaginary glass. To reckless decisions, Jax echoed, the words a promise and a challenge all in one. As they returned to the chaos of Command Deck 13, Jax couldn't help but feel an odd sense of peace, an understanding that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. Because in the end, it wasn't about the technology, the firepower, or even the odds. It was about the people, the stubborn, flawed, endlessly creative people who refused to be beaten. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Commander, the committee wants a debrief, someone called out as they stepped onto the deck. Jack sighed, rolling his eyes in a gesture of long-suffering patience. Of course they do. Probably need to know how much of the budget we'll need to replace the coffee machine. Lyra chuckled, patting him on the shoulder. Good luck with that. Try not to mention the dragons. Me? Mention imaginary dragons. Never, Jack said, his grin as sharp as a knife. But I might just suggest a new line item for strategic chaos. With a final nod to Lyra, Jack strode towards the comms room, ready to face whatever fresh nonsense the committee had in store. It was a new day, a new challenge, and maybe, just maybe, another opportunity to turn the universe on its head. After all, chaos was their ally, and if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was making order out of chaos and chaos out of order, often in the same breath. As the doors slid shut behind him, Jax couldn't help but smile. Whatever came next, they would face it head-on, with all the audacity and irreverence they could muster. Because sometimes, in a universe that thrived on the unexpected, being the wild card was the only way to win. And if anyone could play that role to perfection, it was the crew of the Zenith Spire.